Japan stopped breathing last night. In a television appearance on NHK that nobody in the baseball world was fully prepared for, former Samurai Japan manager Hiroki Ibata sat down in front of the entire nation and exposed the true nature of Munetaka Murakami in a way that has sent shockwaves through every corner of Japanese baseball and Japanese society simultaneously. What the public believed was a simple case of a frustrated player venting his feelings to the media turned out to be something dramatically darker, dramatically more calculated, and dramatically more destructive than anyone had imagined. Ibata revealed that what Murakami did was not a complaint. It was not an emotional outburst born from pressure and pain. It was a deliberate, premeditated, and systematic series of actions that constituted serious disciplinary violations, a conscious and calculated defiance of the entire organizational structure of Samurai Japan, and, most shockingly of all, a deliberate attempt to create what Ibata described as a dual power structure within the national team that undermined the authority of management, shattered the trust of every player in the squad, and ultimately triggered the complete collapse of Samurai Japan from the inside out. This is not the story the public thought they knew. This is the real story. And what Ibata revealed on NHK last night will change the way Japanese baseball understands everything that has happened over the past several weeks. Forever. NHK is not just a television network in Japan. It is an institution. It is the broadcaster that the Japanese public turns to when something truly important needs to be said, when the gravity of a situation demands a platform that carries not just reach but weight, credibility, and national significance. When a figure of genuine public importance chooses NHK as the place to speak, Japan listens. All of Japan, without exception. Which is why the announcement that Hiroki Ibata had agreed to sit down for an extended interview on NHK sent an immediate signal to everyone paying attention that what was coming was not going to be a routine post-resignation reflection or a carefully managed attempt at public image rehabilitation. Something real was about to be said. Something that Ibata had decided the Japanese public needed to hear directly, completely, and without the filtering and softening that comes with press releases and carefully worded official statements. Ibata arrived at the NHK studio alone. No advisors, no publicist, no legal representative sitting just off camera ready to intervene if the conversation moved into territory that needed to be managed. Just Ibata, a microphone, and the full weight of everything he had witnessed, experienced, and ultimately decided he could no longer keep silent about. The interview began with the anchor asking Ibata how he was doing following his resignation. A gentle opening question designed to ease into what everyone suspected was going to be a significant conversation. Ibata answered briefly and without particular emotion. He said he was well. He said he had used the time since his resignation to think carefully and deeply about his responsibilities, not just his responsibilities as a former manager, but his responsibilities as a person who possesses information that the Japanese public deserves to have. And then he said that he was ready to share that information. All of it. The anchor leaned forward slightly. The cameras held steady. And Hiroki Ibata began to talk. The first thing Ibata addressed was the public narrative that had developed around Munetaka Murakami since the beginning of the controversy. He said that this narrative, the story of a struggling player who buckled under the pressure of public expectation and said things in a moment of emotional crisis that he should not have said, is fundamentally and dangerously wrong. He said that what Murakami did was not born from pressure. It was not born from pain. It was not born from the kind of human vulnerability that everyone who has ever performed under intense public scrutiny can understand and sympathize with on some level. What Murakami did, Ibata said, was born from calculation, from strategy, from a deliberate and carefully developed plan that had been taking shape inside the Samurai Japan camp long before the interview that shocked the baseball world ever took place. Ibata revealed that in the weeks leading up to Murakami's explosive public statements, there had been a series of internal incidents within the Samurai Japan squad that constituted clear and serious disciplinary violations. He said that Murakami had repeatedly ignored direct instructions from team management regarding training schedules, media protocols, and team meeting requirements. He said that on multiple occasions, Murakami had communicated directly with other players in ways that actively contradicted and undermined the directives that management had issued, creating confusion, division, and a breakdown of the clear organizational hierarchy that any functioning team depends upon. These were not minor infractions. Ibata was precise and deliberate in making this distinction absolutely clear. These were not the kind of small, human departures from protocol that every team deals with occasionally and addresses quietly through internal channels. These were repeated, escalating, and in Ibata's assessment fully intentional violations of the disciplinary framework that holds a team together, violations that Murakami continued even after being privately warned by management on more than one occasion to stop. Ibata said that at the time, management made the decision to handle these violations internally rather than publicly. They believed, Ibata included, that discretion was the right approach. That bringing Murakami's disciplinary issues into the public arena would cause more damage to the team than it would resolve. That the right thing to do was to address the problem quietly, firmly, and within the family of the squad. That decision, Ibata said with a quiet regret that was impossible to miss, turned out to be wrong. Because the privacy that management offered Murakami out of a genuine desire to protect both the player and the team was not received as an act of good faith. It was received as an opportunity. As the interview continued, Ibata moved beyond the disciplinary violations and into territory that made the NHK studio feel several degrees colder. He began to describe what he called Murakami's deliberate and systematic defiance of the Samurai Japan organizational structure, a defiance that went far beyond individual rule-breaking and represented something that Ibata clearly found deeply troubling on a level that was both professional and personal. He said that Murakami made a calculated decision at some point during the tournament to stop operating as a member of the Samurai Japan team and to begin operating as something else entirely. Not as an individual simply following his own instincts and making his own choices, but as an alternative power center within the squad. A figure who was actively positioning himself, through his relationships with other players, his communications outside of official team channels, and his deliberate public statements, as a counterweight to the authority of team management. Ibata said this was not accidental. It was not the organic result of a frustrated player seeking emotional support from teammates. It was, in his assessment, a strategic choice made with full awareness of its implications and full intention of its effects. He described specific instances where Murakami had organized informal meetings with groups of players that explicitly excluded management and coaching staff. He described communications that were designed to present management's decisions in the most negative possible light to players who were already dealing with the pressures and uncertainties of tournament competition. And he described a pattern of behavior that, taken individually, might have been explainable as the actions of a frustrated athlete, but taken together revealed something far more deliberate and far more damaging. Ibata paused at this point in the interview. He looked directly into the camera. And he said that what Murakami was doing, whether Murakami himself would use this language or not, was attempting to create a dual power structure within Samurai Japan. A situation in which players were effectively being asked to choose between two competing sources of authority within their own team. Management on one side, Murakami on the other. In any organization, Ibata said quietly, a dual power structure is not merely a problem. It is a poison, because it does not simply divide authority, it destroys trust. And once trust is destroyed within a team, no amount of talent, no amount of preparation, and no amount of individual excellence can compensate for what has been lost. Ibata then did something that nobody watching the interview had been expecting. He spoke about the impact of Murakami's actions not in organizational or managerial terms, but in deeply human terms. He spoke about what happened to individual players within the Samurai Japan squad as the dual power structure that Murakami had been quietly constructing began to make itself felt throughout the team. He described players who came to him privately, sometimes late at night, sometimes in brief conversations snatched between training sessions, with expressions of confusion, anxiety, and distress that broke his heart. Players who said they did not know who to listen to anymore. Players who said they felt caught between loyalty to their manager and loyalty to a teammate they had known and respected for years. Players who said that coming to training every morning had started to feel less like preparing for competition and more like navigating a minefield of interpersonal tensions and competing loyalties that they had never signed up to deal with. Ibata said that watching these players, some of the most talented and dedicated athletes in Japanese baseball, being ground down by a crisis of trust that they had done absolutely nothing to create was one of the most painful experiences of his entire career in the sport. He said that a manager's most fundamental responsibility is to create an environment where players can focus entirely on performing at their best. And he said that Murakami's actions had made it impossible to fulfill that responsibility, not through any failure of management, but through a deliberate campaign to undermine the very foundation that made that environment possible. He spoke about the younger players in particular, the ones who had come into the Samurai Japan program with wide eyes and enormous pride, for whom representing the national team was the fulfillment of a dream they had been working toward since childhood. He said that watching those players absorb the anxiety and confusion generated by the dual power structure that Murakami had created, watching their excitement and their focus be replaced by uncertainty and distress, made him angrier than anything else that happened throughout the entire ordeal. Because those players deserved better. Japan deserved better. And the game deserved better. The most devastating section of Ibata's NHK interview came when he addressed the ultimate consequence of everything Murakami had done: the collapse of Samurai Japan as a functioning, unified, and competitive national team program. Ibata said that the word collapse is not an exaggeration. It is the only accurate description of what happened to Samurai Japan over the course of the weeks during which Murakami's disciplinary violations, his defiance of the organizational structure, and his construction of a dual power structure were allowed to develop and deepen without the decisive public intervention that, in retrospect, should have come much sooner. He said that by the time the situation became impossible to contain, by the time it spilled out of the internal world of the team and into the very public arena of interviews, press conferences, suspensions, and resignations, the damage to Samurai Japan had already been done. The trust between players had been fractured. The authority of management had been compromised. The unity that is not just desirable but absolutely essential for a national team to function at the highest level of international competition had been destroyed. And here Ibata said something that landed with particular force in the NHK studio and across the living rooms of the millions of Japanese people watching at home. He said that none of this had to happen. He said that Samurai Japan did not collapse because of a lack of talent. It did not collapse because of poor preparation or inadequate management or the inevitable pressures of elite international competition. It collapsed because one player made a series of deliberate choices that prioritized his own agenda over the well-being of his teammates, his team, and his country. He said that Murakami is a player of extraordinary talent, a fact that makes what happened not easier to accept but harder. Because the tragedy of Samurai Japan's collapse is not the tragedy of a team that was not good enough. It is the tragedy of a team that was absolutely good enough, a team that had everything it needed to compete and to win at the highest level, being destroyed from within by choices that should never have been made. Ibata stopped speaking for a moment. The NHK studio was completely silent. And then he looked into the camera one final time and said something that will stay with Japanese baseball for a very long time. He said that he is sharing all of this not out of anger toward Murakami, not out of a desire for revenge or vindication or the settling of personal scores. He said he is sharing it because Japan deserves to know the truth about what happened to its national team. Because the players who were damaged by what Murakami did deserve to have their experience acknowledged and validated. And because Japanese baseball, which is bigger and more important and more beloved than any individual player or any individual controversy, deserves the chance to learn from this tragedy and to ensure that nothing like it ever happens again. The reaction to Ibata's NHK interview was immediate, enormous, and unlike anything Japanese baseball has generated in the public consciousness in recent memory. Social media, the same social media that Otani had condemned for its culture of personal attack, was consumed within minutes by responses to what Ibata had revealed. Former players, coaches, analysts, journalists, and ordinary fans all poured their reactions into the public space simultaneously, creating a conversation of extraordinary intensity and breadth. The overwhelming majority of responses expressed shock, genuine, deep, and in many cases angry shock, at the revelation that what had appeared to be a straightforward story of a struggling player's emotional breakdown was in reality something so much more deliberate and so much more damaging. Many people said that Ibata's account recontextualized everything they thought they understood about the Samurai Japan collapse, and forced them to reassess their earlier sympathy for Murakami in light of information that fundamentally changed the picture. Others called for NPB to conduct a full and transparent investigation into everything Ibata had described, to independently verify the account he had given on NHK, and to take whatever additional action was warranted in response to what that investigation revealed. They argued that the Japanese public, having now been given Ibata's account of events, deserves the assurance that the full truth has been examined and addressed by the appropriate authorities. And many people, perhaps the most quietly significant voices in the entire conversation, simply expressed grief. Grief for the Samurai Japan program. Grief for the players who had been caught in the crossfire of Murakami's calculated campaign. Grief for the competition that should have been a celebration of Japanese baseball's extraordinary talent and ended instead as a cautionary tale about what happens when individual ambition overrides collective responsibility. Japanese baseball is facing a moment of truth. The revelations Ibata delivered on NHK have made it impossible to look away from the depth and the seriousness of what happened within the Samurai Japan program. The path forward requires honesty, accountability, structural reform, and the kind of courageous leadership that puts the health and integrity of the sport above every other consideration. It will not be easy. Nothing worth rebuilding ever is. But Japanese baseball has survived difficult moments before, and it will survive this one if it is willing to face the full truth of what Ibata revealed last night, and to do the hard work of ensuring that the collapse of Samurai Japan becomes not just a tragedy, but a turning point. The nation is watching. The players are watching. And somewhere, in the quiet of whatever private space he currently occupies, Munetaka Murakami is watching too. The truth has been spoken, and it cannot be unspoken. Thank you so much for watching. Ibata's NHK revelations have completely changed the way Japanese baseball understands everything that has happened, and we want to know exactly what you think. Were you shocked by what Ibata revealed? Do you think Murakami's actions were truly as calculated and deliberate as Ibata described? Drop every thought and reaction you have in the comments section below. And please subscribe to our channel right now, because the most important and most dramatic stories in Japanese baseball are unfolding every single day, and you absolutely cannot afford to miss a single moment of what comes next.